Professional sports fans in Kansas City have had it all. They've watched the Chiefs take the highest honor. They felt glory with the Royals. But before any of that, it was something else that brought them all together under one roof.
Hello.
Oh, brother. He's trying to put the Bulldog out.
A wrestling fan.
For more than half a century, Kansas City sports fans united inside Memorial Hall, Municipal Auditorium, and plenty of other venues to watch their heroes compete, and more importantly, entertain. It's time to meet the men who put Kansas City on the map. This is the history of professional wrestling in Kansas City.
Kansas City territory at one point in time was probably the most solid of all of them across the country.
Kansas City probably was my bread and butter town.
Would I do it again? Absolutely. Over Brown was a great big country boy. He was so big bones and just a strong big man.
He had short legs, relatively, and a long body. A physically powerful man. He was very strong, and you couldn't believe how quick he was.
Was a showman, but he knew how to wrestle too. And he was big enough and strong enough that nobody could mess with him.
And there was this kid that's about 15 years old, and he comes wandering around there, and one guy said, "You better be careful there." He says, "You know who that is?" And he said, "No." He says, "That's Orville Brown." And he says, "He's world heavyweight wrestling champion." "What do you mean world champion?" He says, "Well, he can beat anybody in the world." He comes up and says, "He can't beat anybody in the world." And my dad was sitting there, his feet was out like this, and he reached up, I mean, just like this. He hooks his right foot behind that kid's heel, and he kicks him in the knee and sent him flying about 15 feet. Dad was just sitting there relaxed, went boom, and that kid flew, and you didn't see, he didn't come near my dad after that.
He made his fame in wrestling by the drop kick and by running at people and knocking them over. And he'd go over the top rope and land 8 rows deep into ringside, knocking chairs everywhere, and climb out of it. Didn't bother him.
He was orphaned when he was 11 years old. He lived down in southern Kansas, down around Medicine Lodge, Kansas. He went to Medicine Lodge High School 1 year. When he was about 12 to 14 years old, he worked as a blacksmith helper. A wrestling manager by the name of Ernest Brown, no relation, but he came in, and by this time he had built himself up into a pretty good physical specimen. And the guy walked by and says, "My God, man, what are you doing in the blacksmith shop?" So he got him started, and then he wrestled on carnivals and wherever he could. And the first, he had 72 matches. He never lost a fall. Then he got enough of a reputation that they put him on the card in Wichita. A wrestler by the name of A.B. Coleman saw him, and he called Tom Pax in St. Louis. Now, Tom was one of the biggest promoters in the country. And he said, "Tom, you don't see this kid. He's going to be a real world beater." Tom called him in and told him, he said, "Young man, you have a really great potential." Well, this was a height of depression, about 1933, 34. And Tom Pax on his desk has a great big checkbook, and he opens it up like this, and he writes Dad a check and hands it to him. Dad looked at it, the check was for $5,000, and he had never seen that much money in his life, and he said, "I'll never be able to pay this back." Tom said, I'll get my money back.
Orville took his wife Grace and his son Richard and moved to Baltimore. He found a place to set up a ring and worked out with some of the all-time greats, including George Zaharias, who also later married Olympic gold medalist and golfing great Babe Didrikson in 1938. In August of 1933, world heavyweight champion, the Golden Greek Jim Londos, set up his training headquarters in Philadelphia. He was preparing for his title match against Ed Strangler Lewis. Londos put out the word that he was looking for young sparring partners. Rookies were beaten as quickly as they came in until Orville Brown showed up.
In those days up there, when those things were going on, you had a lot of photographers and newspaper people, and they were all around, and Dad was working out with Londos, and he had him hooked. I mean, he really had him hooked, and Londos couldn't get out. And he looked up at Londos's manager. His name was Ed White, and Ed goes, "No." So Dad let Londos get away, because here's all these newspaper guys. And he called Dad in after and says, "Well, Orville, I don't think we need you anymore." And so he had about 3 big matches with Londos. He never did beat Londos, but they were super good matches. One of them he had Londos, he felt he had him beat, and a flash photographer took a picture in those days with light bulb, blue glass all over the ring, so I had to stop and sweep it up, and Londos got his breath, and Dad thought that kept him from winning.
By the time he was 32 years old, Orville Brown had decided that promoting wrestling was something that he wanted to try. He found an opportunity to do just that in Kansas City in 1940. After Brown partnered up with promoter George Simpson, the two became the center of the Midwest Wrestling Association in Kansas City.
I don't know how George Simpson got in exactly, except that he was a World War I veteran and or involved with the American Legion, who had ability to rent the Municipal Auditorium in Kansas City, Kansas.
George Simpson was more of an administrative type guy. He had never wrestled. He sort of handled the money end of the operation.
When this thing opened up for him in Kansas City, it just seemed like a perfect arrangement, and that's the way he wound up here. Simpson took the talent. Dad did the matchmaking. He decided who would wrestle who, and he would say, "George, here's your card for Thursday night." Then George had to go to the papers and do the promoting. He brought in top-notch people, including himself, of course.
While Brown helped Simpson promote and put together matches for the MWA outside the ring, he also continued to excel in the ring. And in 1940, the MWA recognized a great but aging champion in John Pesek.
At that time, John Pesek was champion, but he was really at a retirement age. He really didn't want to wrestle because he really didn't want to give up the title. John Pesek was one of the great wrestlers of all time, and not a big man, but he was a very tough wrestler.
With Pesek as the recognized champion, there were 2 #1 contenders, Dick Shekat and Orville Brown. Pesek continued to duck the 2 men, and in January of 1940, the governing board of the MWA demanded Pesek to meet at least one of the men by June 1st. It never happened.
He was one of the real all-time greats, but however, Dad would have beaten him at that stage in his life, that's for sure.
On June 5th, 1940, the board stripped Pesek of the title and declared that Shekat and Brown would meet to decide who would be the new champion. On June 28, 1940, Brown and Shekat battled in a 2 out of 3 falls match in Columbus, Ohio. Brown won in 2 straight falls and was proclaimed the undisputed heavyweight champion by the MWA. Even though Brown was the most recognized champion in the Midwest, other smaller territories had their own champs. Orville decided to challenge each one so he could rightfully be known as the only world champion. Along the way, Brown defeated Edie Virag, Lee Wyckoff, and others, but was never able to get a match with a St. Louis title holder named Bill Longson. Orville Brown was also known as the catalyst which brought about the formation of the National Wrestling Alliance. In 1948, promoters from every major city in America joined together and decided to recognize Orville Brown as their champion. Since beating She-Cat, Orville was undefeated in the 8 years since. He continued to hunt down Bill Longston of St. Louis until Longston lost to an up-and-comer named Lou Thesz.
Dad was wrestling as heavyweight champion of the National Wrestling Alliance, which they formed. It was a legal organization, and running in opposition to Lou Thesz's father, who was promoting. Well, they began to outdraw Thesz, so Thesz then one night came up, jumped in the ring where Dad was, and said that he would challenge him. Well, of course, Dad sort of had him there because the champion doesn't challenge anybody. So this makes Dad the champion and Lou Thesz was the challenger. And so Dad says, "I accept your challenge." And this was a big surprise, I think, for Lou. I think Lou thought that he would duck out. But Dad had worked out with Lou in the gym before, and he knew that he could beat him, or he thought he could, and I think generally thought they could have.
A match was set for Thanksgiving night, 1949, inside Kiel Auditorium in St. Louis. Brown had decided to not take any matches for the month leading up to the title match, so his final warm-up match was scheduled in Des Moines, Iowa on Halloween night. Brown was joined by his friend and fellow wrestler Bobby Bruns on the drive back to Kansas City that night. Sadly, while driving near Bethany, Missouri, disaster struck.
Orville Brown, unfortunately, one night was in a wrestling match with Bobby Bruns, one of his hated opponents. And they're coming back from that match and had an automobile accident. Both of them came close to getting decapitated. They ran in under an 18-wheeler that had hijacked on the other side of a hill.
A semi-trailer truck was across the highway, and he came over the hill and ran right under it and struck his head on the side of the truck, and that ended his wrestling career.
They were so tough that when they hit that, they just collapsed all of the seats and went into the back. But at the same time, it took some of their scalp off.
He had a brain injury, and it ended his career. He had a near-new Cadillac, and the insurance company sold it to a salvage company for $215.
Orville was able to save Bruns' life in that crash, but he suffered some injuries. He was going to be the new world champion. He was going to take Lou Thesz's place as world champ. That stopped all of that. So it turned him into a promoter, and he was a good one.
After the accident, he never really fully recovered. He kept on the booking, and then he did more promoting, and so he had a good life there until retirement. Dad, of course, was in a financial position. He didn't have to do it anymore, and he just got tired of it and said, "It's yours," and he walked off and left it.
While Kansas City was flourishing in the mid-20th century, St. Joseph was also a player in the Midwest Territory, thanks to one man, promoter Gust Karas. Karas was born in Greece in 1902, and his family moved to the United States when he was just a youngster. In his teens, Karas made money wrestling all-comers in the carnival circuit. After settling in St. Joseph, Missouri, Karas began work as a wrestling promoter, setting up matches that kept fans coming back for more. Because of this, the Midwest was gaining more strength as a wrestling powerhouse.
Gus Karas was without a doubt one of the greatest promoters that I have ever worked for. Gus treated everybody like family. Didn't matter what your persona was in the ring, you were part of his family, and he watched out for all the guys.
You was one of Gus's boys, or you was one of Kansas City's boys. It was almost like two territories, but everybody worked together. You know, the Kansas City people worked St. Joe people worked Kansas City.
He was honest with the fans. He gave the fans what they wanted. Sometimes I wasn't happy with the decisions that he made, but I wasn't the boss, and he was.
Oh, he was a peach of a guy. He really was. He was honest, and he paid off good. Yeah, he was a nice fellow.
There were many times that he would come into a dressing room and go around and hand extra envelopes to the guys, saying the crowd wasn't as big as what it should have been, but here's a little something from me. And that was the kind of guy that Gus was. He looked out for who was looking out for him and his family.
Karras, like Brown and Simpson in Kansas City, made sure his wrestling shows were suitable for all ages.
Gus never let any of the wrestlers flip anybody off or do anything obscene to make a fan mad. If we said darn in a promo, that promo got reworked and redone. No matter how long that you stood there and talked, if you said darn, it got dumped and you had to redo it. Cleavage, you didn't see that with Gus Karras Promotions and Heart of America.
Karras was also an instrumental part in the careers of two names synonymous with Kansas City wrestling, Bob Geigel and Harley Race.
Gus Karras and I got along, the promoter of St. Joe. He's from Greece, knew how to cook lamb, his wife did. I enjoyed being around him, and I liked everything about Kansas City.
He used to have TV up in St. Joe, and it was just like one camera, and that's all they had. And him and Ronnie Etchison would do the commentating, and Gus would never get Harley's name right. He always called him Harley Rice. And Harley used to get so mad about that. Finally, after a while, he just let it go.
Gus Karras continued his loyalty and drive for the wrestling business right up until his death at the age of 73 on January 16, 1976.
I remember going up to St. Joe TV. It was either a week or maybe 2 weeks before Gus passed away. And you could tell that he was in pretty bad health. Bobby Bruns brought him in along with Ronnie Etchison, and they kind of walked alongside him and halfway carried him in. I walked over and I said, "Good evening, Mr. Karras, how are you?" And he stuck his hand out, a true gentleman, shook my hand. He says, "I don't really like you, but I appreciate you."
From the 1930s through the 1950s, the National Wrestling Alliance's Central States territory was able to draw an impressive collection of champion-caliber wrestlers. There was Bill Longson, the first ever Central States heavyweight champion. Charles Midget Fisher, a world light heavyweight champion who is credited for inventing the pile driver. Fans may remember the Swedish Angel.
The Swedish Angel was a piece of work. Great big hulk of a man, came from someplace in Europe, and his head was so large he'd scare people to death just looking at him. He later in his career retired and became a night watchman. I thought he'd be the perfect night watchman. Nobody's going to approach him.
There was Tarzan Kowalski, Dennis Clary, Bobby Bruns. Another fan favorite was Sonny Myers, a 14-time Central States heavyweight champion. After wrestling, Myers acted as sheriff in Buchanan County, Missouri, and promoted a Sonny Myers Carnival for 22 years.
Sonny Myers was one of the best. Pat O'Connor called him the best good, clean wrestler in the country. Harley Race was high on Sonny Myers. I was high on Sonny Myers.
Now, I never remember Sonny as a wrestler, but I remember Sonny as a referee. He had his own personality as a referee that I always liked. He was the guy in the important matches. I really don't remember any of the other referees, but I remember Sonny Myers as the ref for Central States, and he made an impression on me.
When he stopped wrestling in St. Joe, that town just went because nobody could ever beat him. He was fantastic in the ring.
There was Bob Orton Sr., the father of Bob Orton and grandfather of Randy Orton. Enrique Torres. There was also Bobby Lane. Lenny Montana, who also appeared as Luca Brasi in The Godfather. There was also Wild Red Barry.
Wild Red Berry was one of the most infectious guys because everybody loved him. He did nothing but talk. He wasn't that great a wrestler, but he could talk a good wrestling match. Wild Red Berry, he went over with the people in Hollywood. He was so great. Wild Red was from Pittsburgh, Kansas, and a lady was going through a park in Pittsburgh one time and saw a guy up a tree. And she wanted to know what was going on. He said, "I'm Wild Red Berry. I'm going to jump down and get you." And that was the way he built his reputation.
Other names included El Toro, the Mighty Atlas, Richard Brown, the son of heavyweight champion Orville Brown, Cowboy Bob Ellis, Mike DiBiase, the father of Million Dollar Man Ted DiBiase, and the Dusek brothers. By the 1950s, the Central States Territory was a stronghold for the National Wrestling Alliance. The main draws in the region were Kansas City, Wichita, Des Moines, Topeka, and St. Joseph. It had been quite a ride for the Blacksmith from Kansas, but after decades as a championship wrestler and successful wrestling promoter, Orville Brown retired in 1958, leaving the NWA Central States promotion with George Simpson in Kansas City and Gus Karras in St. Joseph. Due to his age, Simpson was also on his way out of the business, which left Karras looking for a new partner.
Gus Karras in St. Joe said, "Would you like to come in here and be my partner?" So I said, "Well, I got another guy with me by the name of Pat O'Connor." And he said, "Great." He said, "Pat O'Connor's he's talented." So Pat and I came down here and bought out part of George Simpson, and we enjoyed it. We liked it, and we made this our headquarters from then on.
When Bob Geigel was born in Algona, Iowa on October 1st, 1924, professional wrestling, at least in his life, was non-existent.
Never was at a wrestling match in my life. Lived on a farm, knew how to milk cows, was in sports, participated. Wasn't too good because I'd never been around anything. I'd never been to a football game, and I never saw a football game because we had no TV then.
But at 6 foot tall and 230 pounds, sports found their way into Geigel's life.
I went out for football when I was a freshman, and I was kind of clumsy and left-handed. Big kid, but other than that, the wrestling coach wanted me to come out for wrestling. So I went home and talked to my dad, and he said, "We got to unload corn in the fall." He said, "It'll be kind of hard for me to cut you loose at that time." So I went back and told the wrestling coach. And he said, "Well, may I talk to your folks?" I said, "Sure you can, come on out." So the wrestling coach and his wife came out and ate supper with us one night. And he talked to my dad, and my dad said, "Well, how soon could you get him out? Could you get him home by 6:30? Wrestling coach said, "Sure." So that's the way I started wrestling.
His resume as a football player and amateur wrestler grew as Geigel accepted a scholarship to the University of Iowa. He lettered 4 times in football, 3 times in wrestling, placing 3rd at the NCAA championships. Near the end of college, Geigel contemplated his next move.
There was a guy in Des Moines, Iowa that had a bar. His name was Babe Bizignano. He said, "What are you going to do when you get out of school?" I said, "Well, I'm going to have a tryout with the old Chicago Cardinals." He said, "How much money are you going to make?" I had to make the team to make $4,800 a year, which is not it wasn't even a big salary in that era. So he said, "You can make more money in a week and in a month wrestling than you did for a year in football." He said, "You'll get all banged up." So he fixed me up with a promoter in Tampa, Florida, by the name of Cowboy Luttrell. And I went down to Florida and started wrestling there.
Geigel wrestled in Florida, then Texas, followed by Columbus, Ohio, Nova Scotia, New York, back to Texas, then Minnesota. That's when Gus Karras decided to ask Geigel to become his partner in Kansas City and St. Joseph, Missouri.
Orville Brown was already out. Then we bought out George Simpson. George Simpson owned half of Kansas City. And then eventually we bought out George Simpson. And then we bought out Gus Karras.
When Geigel gets into the ring, they like to call him the Hairy Ape. Those aren't flies all over his back.
And you want me to show you, Fred Everett, how easy
No,
it is?
I just assumed you did.
Come here, let me show you, Fred.
I just assumed you did. No, it's all right. It's all right. It's all right. I'll take your word for it.
Hey, it'll flow, Fred. You probably got a little blood in your veins, too.
I'm sure I am. I'll take your word for it if it's all the same to you.
Geigel remained the main NWA Central States promoter from 1958 until 1986. It was during this time that Kansas City began its rise as one of the top wrestling territories in the United States.
Bob Geigel is probably as good a friend as any human being could ever have. If Geigel was on your side, he was on your side.
Geigel and I have been friends for years. I love the guy. He was a great wrestler.
Bob Geigel probably I've worked with closer than anybody else, and probably is still to this day my best friend I've ever had in my life. And that's how much I cherish Bob Geigel.
Bob would, he had your match, he wanted you to work hard, and he left you alone. He didn't grab you and take you to the shower and start screaming at you, or you could have done this, or you could have done that, or anything like that. Bob was a good guy. He was a good guy. In fact, I still see him occasionally. We have lunch together. And he hasn't changed a bit. Still looks the same.
Bob Geigel, you know, he was the president of the NWA, and he was the promoter, but he would come in the dressing room and he was just like one of the boys. In fact, he'd pull jokes on you, ribs on you, he'd kibitz around, you know, he was a great guy.
Bob Geigel, no stranger to championships either. He was Texas State champion. He was Central States champion, tag team champions. He also was Florida State heavyweight champion for a while he was in Florida. He was the kind of guy that, he'd get another one that would give you the shirt off his back and throw in the buttons if you needed it. But you had to go and work for it. He didn't just hand it over to you. You had to show him something.
Business-wise, Geigel was a very, very astute guy. Back when we were involved in wrestling in central part of the United States, television hadn't been in all that long. None of us really knew exactly what we were doing in the television side of it. But we knew what we were doing in that squared circle out there. And Geigel was good at both sides of that. The television side, he was also good in the ring.
Tremendous performer. Besides that, he had some, I can't say the word, he had some guts. Harley Race, if you could beat him, you couldn't do it by talking about it. You had to do it. And he wasn't bashful how he won either. Didn't care.
They know that there's not a meaner man on the face of God's green earth than the man standing right here talking to you. They know that there's not a man that can wrestle any better than the man standing here talking to you.
Harley Race, undoubtedly the greatest professional wrestler from Kansas City, an 8-time NWA World Champion. Race was born in Quitman, Missouri on April 11, 1943. After overcoming polio as a child, he became a fan of pro wrestling at an early age.
We got our first television, and I saw Saturday Night Wrestling on St. Joe TV, and I knew what Harley Race was going to do for the rest of his life.
As a teen, Race was a stout 6'1", 225 pounds, and he was recruited by St. Joseph promoter Gus Karras. Karras gave his new pupil various odd jobs as he continued to train.
I had been on the carnival stuff and that, but my actual shot into professional wrestling was driving Happy Humphrey. All over the United States, he was generally into, back then, what we called territories, a week at a time.
At 18, Race moved to Nashville and began wrestling under the name of Jack Long. Race was getting noticed as a future superstar until tragedy struck.
He was with his wife and I think his son. And one Sunday morning they were going someplace and a truckload of chickens came over the top of the hill and the driver went to sleep and hit Harley head on, killed his wife and his child. It almost cut his leg off. But Gus Karras, the promoter of St. Joe, went and talked to the doctor and he said, let me have my doctor give you a second opinion. And they saved his leg. So Harley and Gus Karras were pretty good friends.
He's the only reason I have 2 legs today. I had a car accident and they were going to amputate my leg, and Gus Karras came up to see me and my mother and father in Maryville, Missouri, and the decision was made at that point to take the leg off, and Gus asked him if he could take me to see a specialist in St. Joe, and I still got it today.
Although doctors said he may never walk again, Race proved them wrong, making a full recovery. He returned to the ring, this time as Harley Race, in 1964. He wrestled in many territories, including Texas and Minnesota, before returning home to wrestle primarily in the Central States Territory in the early 1970s. His career as a top singles wrestler was launched when he won his first NWA World Championship on May 23, 1973, against Dory Funk Jr. inside Memorial Hall in Kansas City, Kansas.
He brought a lot of credibility to the territory, because the title meant something back then. It really did.
Probably the biggest influence of anybody in the area.
Harley could sell this building or any one of the buildings out anywhere in the Midwest that he wanted to.
I've known him for quite a long time, and he is the epitome of a professional athlete.
As his career flourished, Harley's reputation grew as one of the toughest men to ever climb into a ring.
Harley was a tough son of a gun. His ability was unbelievable.
I guess some biker or something got in the ring, and finally Harley got in and he said, watch this, and he headbutted him and he put it on him, and and the guy, I guess he went out and did what comes natural when they go out, if you know what I mean.
In Tampa, Florida, Harley had a thing going, and there was a bunch of karate kids at the match. They was telling Harley and challenging him on how tough their instructor was. So Harley said, well, you just bring your instructor down next week and I'll wrestle him. And it's like I was saying, Harley and I, anybody could beat us in 10 minutes, got $1,000. So the karate guy comes down, one whole section of ringside is filled with all the little karate kids and their little gis on. And Harley gets in the ring with a guy, and he goes through all these things, like that, and woo! Harley's left-handed, so as soon as he went like this, Harley, boom, knocked him out. And down on the floor he went. So the referee got him up, dusted him off. Again, he went through all these karate stuff, like that, boom, boom, boom. After Harley knocked him out 3 times, the little karate guys dragged the karate guy off, and Harley went and walked down the ring. The guy never touched him. But what a cartoon.
I understand, and I think it was up in Nova Scotia, he backhanded somebody, and he hit him so hard that I guess his finger hit his tooth and cut the end of his finger off, and they sewed it back on. But yeah, Harley, he was pretty tough.
The satisfaction I got of beating Bulldog means more to me than that. And the opportunity to beat on him again I'll get it back. Brown, I guarantee you, I'm not going to stand here and lie to these people. I'm going to take that away from you.
Winning the NWA World Championship in 1973 gave Race the capital he needed to enter the promotion ranks.
As you're getting involved in this business, it's very easy to see that the longevity inside that squared thing is not all that long. And nor is the money compared to the promotional side of it. And I won my first World's title and bought into Kansas City all virtually in the same year.
Race joined Geigel and O'Connor, and they formed Heart of America Sports Attractions, the parent company which oversaw NWA Central States Wrestling. The partnership lasted almost 3 decades.
I actually bought Gus's family out, and it became Geigel, O'Connor, and Race. And a little later on, we bought into the St. Louis area, and Sam Mushnick was involved in that side of it. Then eventually we bought Sam out, and it was the 3 of us for a long time.
With the rise of television, the Central States territory was booming, and Kansas City pro wrestling fans were treated with some of the best entertainment in the world.
Kansas City territory at one point in time was probably the most solid of all of them across the country. It became mega when we included St. Louis into it. But overall, the Central States was probably as firm a position in wrestling as there ever was.
Hello, wrestling fans.
Every Sunday morning, All-Star Wrestling found its way into the homes of loyal fans.
We had some of the best names in the business coming in and out of this arena, and I was proud to be part of that.
It became something that my dad and I, it was a ritual we did. And we never really watched baseball or football together, but every Sunday morning we were there in front of the TV watching wrestling.
We started at Channel 9 for just a short time. I went to Channel 4 and went to Channel, we did sometime down to Channel 27 in Topeka. Then we finished our longest spree was with Jim O'Connor and the people at Channel 41.
People would come in and we would invite the public to come in, and it was all a studio thing, and we just set up though like a hall and had the ring, the regular ring, and we'd have 2 top flight wrestlers wrestling.
Bob Wormington brought us in originally because he could see something that somebody else couldn't see. You know, we had big audiences on All-Star Wrestling here in Kansas City. Then Bob Wormington left 4 and went to 41. And we went with him. And I think it was good for him and good for us.
Weekly events were always sellouts at local venues, including what many consider to be the mecca of pro wrestling in the Midwest, Memorial Hall in Kansas City, Kansas.
It was a hotbed of wrestling, Kansas City, Kansas Memorial Hall.
It was probably the best building I've ever wrestled in.
And Memorial Hall was a good place. It was a box-like thing, had a balcony, and it really meant for something like a wrestling match.
It was something about it, it just said wrestling.
This building is like a Madison Square Garden of New York.
It held several thousand, but it wasn't a 60,000 seat stadium as we see today. But it was really built for it because you were up close enough wrestling in the balconies and so forth.
The atmosphere was fantastic. The intensity, the personality of the people being wrapped around you.
Memorial Hall was gritty and it was smoky inside. And you had all these fans that were packed in there, and it was really close quarters. And I liked the feel of that.
I've only been in 2 buildings that I can recall that had the atmosphere of wrestling. One was Marigold Arena in Chicago, where I started, and the other one was Memorial Hall here. It was like you couldn't picture that building being used for anything else but wrestling.
You're set back from 3 foot away from the ring, and you're sitting in the front row of ringside. And the wrestlers used you to chastise you if they so did even, or you could clap their hands or shake your hand, give them a half five. Not like the days nowadays. You can't hardly touch or get any close to anybody.
It's synonymous with the name wrestling because it has a history that goes back, I don't know, probably into the 30s when the building was erected.
The top balcony was almost a ringside seat. And the first balcony, at least the first 8 or 10 rows were almost ringside seats. It was great. It really was great.
No stereotype would fit the kind of individuals who frequented Central States Wrestling. There was no better example of this than a set of elderly twin sisters, Myrtie and Gertie Height.
If you know anything at all about television wrestling in the Midwest, you knew Myrtie and Gertie Height.
Identical twins. Beautiful ladies. I told each one of them that I loved them. I didn't know which one I told first.
Please believe me, as nice as they looked and as cute as they looked, they were the hat pin twins. I've been hit in the rear end with that hat pin countless numbers of times. And you turn around to say something to it or about it, and here's 2 beautiful gray-haired ladies looking at you smiling. What could you do about it?
They would swing purses and umbrellas at me, poke me in the back with umbrellas. They were unbelievable. They were quite a pair, Myrtie and Gertie.
Those 2 ladies had a chauffeur. They would go everywhere all over the Midwest to watch their wrestlers. They knew where they were wrestling in Des Moines, in Omaha, in Denver, and they would have their chauffeur take them to wherever it is. They loved the wrestling. 2 little old gray-haired women, and you would never expect them to be nuts over wrestling.
They had a guy by the name of Bill Wilson that drove them to other towns to wrestling matches. Took them to St. Joe, took them to St. Louis, took them to Omaha, took them to Tulsa, all over the Midwest, and they'd pay him to take them. And he liked to go too. 6 months after Myrtie and Gertie Height, the last one died, Bill Wilson died. Bill Wilson's brother called me on the phone one day. He said, Bill Wilson has requested in his will that his ashes be sprinkled on the floor of Memorial Hall on a Thursday night. That's kind of a strange request to make. So I took Bill Wilson and a box of ashes. His brother brought him to me, and I brought him home, put him in a garage. One day my wife said, you've got to get Bill Wilson out of the garage. I can't walk through there. So I took Bill Wilson over to Memorial Hall. The office door wasn't locked where Mike Springer's office was. I had my wife wrap up Bill Wilson in Christmas paper, put him on his desk, and left. Had a wrestling match in St. Joe about a year later. Oh, the auditorium manager in St. Joe in the new auditorium said, oh, so UPS left a package for you today. I knew who it was Bill Wilson. So I brought Bill Wilson back home, put him in a garage. My wife said, don't do that to me. She said, you're driving me crazy. So one day the kids and me are all out in the pool. I said, let's go to Memorial Hall and take Bill Wilson with us. So we crossed the Fairfax Bridge, went down 7th Street to Memorial Hall, got out, opened up Bill Wilson, and sprinkled his ashes on the grass in front of Memorial Hall. And I felt that Bill Wilson would probably just as soon have his ashes on the grass where he wouldn't get swept up and scrubbed up as he would be inside. And that's what's happened to Bill Wilson.
This is my home. It was my people that I had to prove myself to every Thursday or every Friday night.
We wrestled here every week, and we didn't wrestle in these other towns every week. So naturally, they were better acquainted with us. They knew our families. They knew everything about us.
The same people will be there every week, 52 weeks out of the year. They're the greatest sports fan in the world.
I had people run at me with a knife, and you just sort of grab them, and you just, grab their wrists, snatch them up off the ground, and walk them down the aisle. They're not going to hurt you.
If it's 15 degrees below zero or 100 degrees in the shade, if there's a wrestling match going on, they were going to be there. And people knew them by their first names, and if somebody was sick and away for a couple of weeks, they were worried about them.
When you walk out to the ring every Thursday night in Kansas City, Kansas, in your mind you knew who was in the first 2 or 3 rows around ringside, and if one of them didn't show up, you looked, there's something missing.
For decades, Kansas City was a major focal point for professional wrestling. The city's notoriety brought in many top stars in the business. Some became mainstays, others just had brief visits. But the list of names who worked in Kansas City is like an all-star roster. One of the big names Kansas City fans got to know real well was the infamous Bulldog Bob Brown.
Bulldog Bob Brown was another person that you couldn't forget. He was obnoxious, but obnoxious nice. He wasn't obnoxious.
Sometimes he got on your nerves, sometimes he didn't.
When everybody talks Kansas City, they talk about Bob Brown.
I had so much fun with the Bulldog. He used to be, I think, for the Royal Mounted Police in Canada.
Bob Brown's from Winnipeg, Manitoba. I wrestled in Winnipeg one night, and Bob Brown was the referee. It looked like a barrel. He weighed about 310 pounds. And we had some wrestlers in here that just came out of Montreal. Tiny Mills, a big guy, about 300 pounds, about 6'6". And I said to Tiny one day, "What do they got up in Montreal?" He said, "They got a kid by the name of Bob Brown from Winnipeg." I said, "I know Bob Brown. He weighs 300 pounds. No, Tiny says he's down to about 260. So I called Johnny Rougeau, the promoter in Montreal. I said, "Can you cut Bob Brown loose?" He said, "Well, we can in about 6 weeks." So about 6 weeks later, we brought Bob Brown in, and he was a box office attraction. He was another Rufus R. Jones. Maybe not quite as strong as Rufus, but very, very close.
I told Bob about the Kansas City area, and St. Joe was still involved at that point in time, and he came down, and him and Geigel became very, very good friends, and also a great tag team was established, and he never went back to Canada. He made Kansas City his home.
Most of the guys, they didn't have the big bodybuilder physique, but Bulldog Bob Brown just looked like a tough street thug almost, with his crew cut haircut and his almost average build. He didn't look as tall as some of the other guys, but yet he was tough. He was like a bulldog. He'd go in there and he'd fight anybody and mix it up with them.
They loved to hate Bob Brown, and he would egg them on. He would try to make them as mad as they could possibly can. He was probably the most excitable wrestler. And over time I tried to interview him. Well, he would profusely continue to spit. Now, every time I interviewed him, I'd spit all over my shirt or my jacket.
Well, there was certainly nothing settled between me and Bruiser Brody. Big Cage Fury was probably one of the greatest matches that the Midwest has ever seen. No, nothing settled. Nothing whatsoever.
He would talk on a microphone and spit and snort and belch and do everything else, and the poor announcer, Bill Kirsten, sometimes had to go and change outfits right after his interviews.
He was a hard man to control in the ring because he had the little short arms. It was hard to get a hold on the guy. And he was like that pole there. He was just stiff as can be, so you had a hard time twisting him around,
He'd go from being this good guy, and then all of a sudden he'd turn against Mario Jannetty and become a heel, and I hated him even more than I loved him before. And then somehow he'd someone else would beat him up, he'd beat him to a bloody pulp, and then he'd become my favorite again. And he could go back and forth, and I never got tired of that.
He was different. He was different.
His nature was obnoxious. He had an obnoxious nature, but a super nice guy. Ate Thanksgiving dinner here with us every Thanksgiving. He was here at the house for Thanksgiving dinner. Knocked everything on the table. Didn't like the turkey. Didn't like cranberries. Didn't like duck. But he liked it. But he'd tell my wife, "Ooh, it's terrible." But we all liked him.
In 1996, Brown retired from wrestling following a heart attack. Then on February 5th, 1997, Brown died at the age of 57 in Kansas City, Missouri.
I remember to this day the memorial we had for him after his death, but we got a bunch of the wrestlers get together and talk about Bob Brown over the period of time. Great guy.
Another Kansas City stalwart was the freight train, Rufus R. Jones.
Rufus was a funny guy.
One of the most gentleman wrestlers I've ever known.
Good, honest man. Funny guy.
He was a box office attraction. Just when he walked in the ring, you could tell that people got it for him. When you saw him, when you met him, he left an impression with you. And Rufus was that person. He was just a great human being.
Rufus, I knew I could trust with my life.
His showmanship was natural. You know, I mean, he was Rufus all the time.
Everybody in my organization liked Rufus too. Harley liked him, Pat liked him. Everybody liked Rufus R. Jones. There's just some people that you meet and you bond with, and you know that you and this person can do a lot of good things together. And I met him in Amarillo. I came back home latter part of the 60s, and I brought Rufus with me, and he never left the area.
Guess what I want? To get in the ring with a street fight match with my clothes on. I do exactly what I want to do. Use a chair or anything. All I want to do is get back in the ring. A street fight night, baby, and I will kick his butt.
Jones passed away on November 13th, 1993.
He was hunting. I guess he had a heart attack. He was hunting with a guy by the name of Orrin Jones. He looked around, he couldn't find Rufus, and he went back looking for him, and he found him. I think he was only like 54 or something like that, and he wasn't too old. He had his bar down there at ringside. What was it, 20th and Vine or something like that? And his wife kept it going for a while after he died, but you know, he was the reason everybody came down there, you know.
I went over the casket with Billy Howard. I put my hand on Rufus's hand and I said, "Roof," I said, "this is it. I'll never wrestle again." I said, "You're the only one I could trust not to hurt me."
I know I was at Paul Verity's funeral, we almost dropped him. We were carrying Rufus down the steps. Bob Brown, me, 4 other wrestlers. Bob Brown and me were in front, and the steps are real steep. Rufus weighed about 320, and the coffin was a big, heavy coffin. They spent some money on a coffin for Rufus. We had to go with 2 hands. I thought we were going to drop the coffin, tell you the truth. I said, "Brown, lift." Brown said, "Hell, I'm a stake in the ground now."
Known to his Kansas City fans as Nature Boy, strongman Roger Kirby also made a name for himself in the Kansas City territory.
Nature Boy Kirby.
I hate to say this, but Roger was probably one of the best there ever was.
People loved to hate him many times, but the people enjoyed him, and they thought very highly of his ability.
Kirby could do anything, and he had a fantastic body, and he looked the part.
Roger Kirby is one of the real nice people out of wrestling.
He was a consummate performer in the ring, and he was also a very well-conditioned athlete back there in that dressing room.
The difference between Kirby and myself, as far as the way our careers went, was I got lucky, Roger didn't. All the talent was there.
Here's the young kid from Indiana that grew up on a farm with nothing, and here I am in the people eyes, a superstar.
He's better than me in a lot of ways.
And he was strong. You know, he held the world leg press machine, Nautilus leg press. He held that record. I think it was like 2,850 pounds, and that was documented by Nautilus. That wasn't, you know, something that was concocted in the dressing room.
Gus adopted me like one of his kids. Gus is the one that gave me the name of Nature Boy. You know, and it's just, I had to bleach blonde hair. You know, it's blonde now, but it's gray. It's not bleached.
He was a heck of an athlete. Kirby was a little tough. Kirby's like Race. Race is a little tough. Not a little tough. Race would hurt you. I don't know whether Kirby would hurt you or not. He might, but he was an awful nice person.
He was as good in-ring person that you'll ever meet. His knowledge-wise, reaction-wise, not only reaction to the person that he was facing, but to the crowd, to everything. Roger had everything there was to be world's champion many times over.
Now he's got 2 new knees, he's got 2 new hips, had his nose straightened. Rufus broke his nose, he had that straightened. Let's see what else will Roger have. And he's put on about 50 pounds. He won't haven't we all?
Hello, wrestling fans. Are you ready? Get set, sit back and relax. It's time for the most exciting hour on television, All-Star Wrestling.
Bill Kirsten was the voice of Kansas City wrestling throughout the territory's heyday.
An opening came for the ring announcer, which is before TV, by the way, and I tried to get that ring announcer's job, and the promoter, George Simpson, said, no, you haven't got any experience in on the microphone, you haven't done this, you haven't. So they hired Owen Bush, who used to be the sports director of Channel 4. All of a sudden, he told me he was leaving, going to Desilu in Hollywood. So I said, well, don't tell anybody, I want your job. And so he didn't tell anybody. The next week, instead of coming in my white slacks and a white t-shirt, I came dressed up with the kill. And the promoter came out and he said, where's Red? I said, Mr. Simpson, Owen Bush is gone. He's in Hollywood, he got a new job. Oh, we need him. I says, no, you know I want to do it. Let me do it, let me do it. He says, no, you don't have any experience doing this, you haven't done this, you've never done this. I said, well, the bell's about to ring in about 30 seconds, let me do it. He said, okay, you can do it tonight. And tonight lasted about 30 years.
I was always impressed with Bill Kirsten and his commentary.
The Hello Wrestling fan was born, and Kirsten was a great announcer.
He didn't try to make it classic. You know, he just told it to them like it was. And they understood Bill.
I thought he was one of the better ones. I thought Gordon Soley was probably the best I've ever heard, but Bill was pretty darn close to it. Why they ever got anybody else, I have no idea.
A lot of people say Bill didn't have the greatest vocabulary in the world. He had a vocabulary that met the wrestling fans.
Still going up to the movie theater or going to down to the mall somewhere or a convention somewhere and people will say, hello, Bill. Nothing, that's priceless.
Another big fan favorite in the Central States was a Native American wrestler named Danny Little Bear.
He was one of the people that were really, really box office.
An outstanding performer, an outstanding wrestler, not one of my best friends.
He had the ability or the concept of what it took to make a match.
Tremendous showman.
When Danny Little Bear was on the main event, he draw good crowds, which is what you can say that anybody like that, you know, if you're a main eventer and you draw the people, that's all you can ask for. So he was a good wrestler, undoubtedly.
Out in the real world or out in to the world, I didn't really want to be around Danny all that much.
I was over to his house one time when the first week I came to Kansas City, and then lost track of him. I think he went to jail for a while.
Little Bear made a lot of money here. Didn't save any. He liked nice cars. He liked pretty girls. And the combination of the two kind of takes your finances down. Little Bear hurt his back. Had to get out of wrestling. He tried a couple different things and it didn't make any money. Now, Little Bear didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't do drugs, but he started selling drugs. First time he got busted. Selling drugs wasn't a bad thing, not like it would be today. So he got caught the second time, and he got caught the third time. The third time he went to Kentucky prison for, I think, 2 years or 3 years. He got out. He couldn't do anything to make any money. And it's not easy for a guy out of the penitentiary to get a job, I guess. But Little Bear was a very, very pleasant, sociable person. He went back to selling drugs again the second time. The second time he got caught, this time he went back in, I think, for 3 more years. He got out, had cancer, and died.
Have you ever met someone that you almost trusted, there was always that little bit of shadow that was there, and Little Bear stayed involved in that shadow.
Bob Morse, known to his fans as the Viking, is remembered fondly by his peers.
Great guy, a partier from the word go.
Yeah, he was a fun guy. He liked to party.
Bob's buried just up here in Leavenworth, Kansas, at the National Cemetery. Hard to believe. I would have never thought him to be a military man. Not at all.
If you knew the Viking, you liked the Viking.
The Viking was a rifle bearer, rifle squad for Harry Truman. Anytime Harry Truman went someplace and they had a rifle team with him, the Viking was one of those people.
I was following the Viking down to western Kansas somewhere. I was following him and he come up past him, and he honked his horn at me, and I looked over there and there was a Viking. Of course, you always could tell because he had these big horns on the front of his car. So he looked at me, and I looked over to him, and the girlfriend he was with, she flashed. And I had fun with that, and of course I never mentioned anybody else.
The Viking was very knowledgeable about former presidents of the United States. And when I was in the 2nd or 3rd grade, my school teacher made us learn all the presidents in order. The Viking and I used to have a little contest between us. He'd get in the car, and I'd say, "Get up here with me, Vike, so I can talk to you." He said, "No," he says, "I want to be in the back seat, so you can't talk to me." So he'd ask me questions on the presidents. Who was the only president that wasn't married? And he'd have all these questions for me. It'd take the whole trip. He'd get his repertoire out, and I really liked the Viking.
Harley Race dubbed Percival A. Friend the epitome of a pro wrestling manager.
People instantly did not like me.
He could irritate the people worse than anybody.
I don't know whether it was the way that I dressed. Nothing on me ever matched, by the way. This is the last of my original briefcases. And as you can see, it's got a little bit of damage here on the edges. I was always accused of carrying a brick in there. Never proven, though. I still carry that briefcase everywhere I go. I miss being here. I miss the crowds. I miss the camaraderie in the dressing rooms with all of my friends, some that are no longer with us. And this was a part of my life that I'm very proud of, and that if I had to do it over again, I would, without a doubt. I only wish that I could turn the hands back on the clock of time and go back and relive those wonderful glory days of the golden age of wrestling, which was the 70s here, as far as I was concerned, here in Kansas City.
Besides the stable of Kansas City regulars, other big names found their way through the City of Fountains, including a future politician.
Jesse Ventura, another classic individual.
You know who was a nice guy that everybody thought was a jackass? The governor of Minnesota.
He did not need an interviewer. He could handle his own vocabulary.
Jesse was a super guy. As a matter of fact, I had his first match.
He always mimicked me. Every time he'd get on TV with me, he'd mimic me and say, Mr. Kirschbaum.
Jesse was a sharp guy. Jesse could talk, and Jesse can think. Jesse might have been a candidate for president if he had stayed with it.
Everyone has their favorite Andre the Giant story.
We were on our way to Wichita, and he got hungry, and he wanted to stop and eat. And we stopped at a restaurant, and I think it was a Denny's. He didn't like to talk much out in public. He looked at the menu, and they had a daily luncheon special. And he just kind of pointed to it. I said, I'll have iced tea. And she turned around, and the waitress, and started walking away real quick, and he wanted 5 of them. And I said, Miss, and she turned around, and I said, what? He wants 5 of them, and he did. He ate all 5 of them.
We were driving back from Salina, Kansas in my car, and you get about out of Salina, you can see 15 miles on this one particular road. And so some kids were following us in the car, and they'd come up in front of us, and we would come up in front of them, and they were playing with us a little bit. And so then Andre says, Mr. Bill? I said, yeah, Andre. He says, pull alongside that car. So I pulled alongside the car, and he said, okay, hold her right there, hold her right there. And he reached in the back seat and pushed the window down, and put the front seat and pushed the window down. Then he reached over towards me and got up on his knees and mooned him. Mooned them big time, and they just started quivering. The car fell back there, and they was probably still laughing at this day. But he said, Mr. Bill, I gave him the full moon.
He was just a blast. We was in a bar drinking, and this little bitty guy, and he started, trying to pick a fight with me. Andre called everybody boss. He leans over, he said, don't worry, boss, I'll take care of this. and he stood up, folded a folding chair up, scooped the guy under his armpits with a folding chair, and just picked him up and stuck him to the wall, right through the sheetrock paneling and everything. And now he's hanging, his feet's 3 foot off the ground, and he's kicking his legs, and his arms are pinned. The legs of the chair is under his arms. Andre walks up to the bar, hands the guy like $200 or $300, apologizes, and we left. And the guy's hanging on the wall.
He went home to his father's funeral. He lived 20 miles out of Paris, or some distance out of Paris. Went into Paris and stayed the night. They found him dead in bed the next morning.
Future WWE stars were just youngsters in Kansas City, including the Midnight Rockers tag team consisting of Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty.
Marty Jannetty was a talent, one of the better talents. Nice personality. Girls loved Marty Jannetty, and I was happy about that too.
He was definitely the bigger star of the two at the time.
Shawn Michaels was here in the Kansas City area for about a year, maybe a little longer than that. You just knew Michaels was ready to explode. He was ready to come onto the scene.
We had a blast with him. There was 2 young kids wanting to learn, but I mean, God, we had so much fun with them. And they was gullible.
I remember seeing this young kid with blonde hair, short blonde hair at the time, wearing a Royals t-shirt, trying to get over with the fans that way. but yet Marty Jannetty was the star at the time.
Marty liked to have fun, and he was kind of a player. And I'm not surprised that Shawn Michaels made more money, but I don't think he was the talent that Marty Jannetty was.
I think he probably influenced Shawn a lot more than what Shawn would admit. Because I think when Shawn came to Kansas City, I think a lot of Marty rubbed off on him.
Shawn has always been a type of guy that if there's something there for him to get, he was going after it. Marty was the type of guy, if there was something there for him to get, if it was there tomorrow, it would be just as good.
You could almost suggest things for them to do in the ring, and they'd do it, not knowing what the consequence, that they was going to get beat sooner or later.
It was, one of a better word, awesome for the people. And in the ring, they were as charismatic could be.
Others include Billy Howard, Scott Hall. There was Ireland's own Black Angus. Ox Baker from Sedalia, Missouri, went on to star in the movie Escape from New York. He got his start in Kansas City.
As far as I know, this is unprecedented. And now, can you come over here a minute, sir? I know there's a little difficulty with English. Are we out of time on All-Star Wrestling? Are we out of time completely? It's all over. Well, I'm very sorry. I did want a chance to talk to you. I know you showed me your citizenship papers some months ago when we first had a chance to talk. What is your name, sir?
They just call me the Ox.
The Ox?
The Ox.
Well, I can understand why. Did you tell me once before that you packed close to 300 pounds on that frame?
Yes, I weigh over 300 pounds.
Well,
I've been all over the country. I want to wrestle, get in there and scuffle around with them people, and they always throw me out, and I've been in jail all over.
Listen, I know that we're running out of time here on our All-Star Wrestling, and I'd like to have a chance to talk to you. Maybe sometime you can be on television, but it's going to be this coming Thursday night. You'll be matched against Johnny Ramirez, the fellow that Geigel wrestled today. I do want to wish you good luck.
Did you get me a wrestling match?
Yes, sir. Mr. Simpson, the promoter, just watched it and was watching you today, and he's going to put you in the wrestling ring.
Thank you.
Oh, wait. I didn't have anything to do with it.
There was Pat O'Connor, a great wrestler and part owner of the Central States promotion. Bruiser Bob Sweeten. Dick Murdoch. Dusty Rhodes. Buzz Tyler. Ed Wiskoski. And a well-dressed manager named Slick.
Everybody's gonna find out why, when you were born, your mama took one look at you and called you Bruiser. And when I was born, my mama took one look at me and called me Slick, brother. And don't you ever forget that.
The suits and the hats. I think he started off as a babyface, if I remember right, as a manager with Rufus. And then, yeah, when he turned against Rufus, though, instantly, everybody hated him.
For once in his meaningless life, Bob Geigel has done an honorable thing. In the first place, let me tell you, you just saved yourself and the National Wrestling Alliance a big lawsuit. Let me tell you something. These two men are going to prove once and for all tonight that they are the superior and the supreme team, known as the Dream Team, in professional wrestling today.
There was Japanese-born grappler Akio Sato.
What a heck of a performer he was. Promoters in Japan, his name was Baba. So I talked to Baba and I said, can you cut Sato loose? He said, well, if he wants to go, he said, I can cut him loose in about 6 weeks. So he brought him over, and Funk and I signed for him, and we got him in. And it wasn't a mistake.
Here's a guy that was obviously from the Orient, and he came to compete in Kansas City. You know, for him to come here, this was a huge deal, you know, and it kind of elevated Central States too.
And former Central States champion Mike George.
Truthfully, I thought Mike would be kind of where I went. Everything was there for him to go there. I don't know if it's just he was there as wrestling was kind of self-destructing.
I remember him in a match with Flair at one time, and I think they might have gone to a 45-minute draw, and that was big because it elevated Mike to a level where he could compete, you know, with Ric Flair, and so if he can compete with Flair, then you know he could beat, you know, almost anybody.
Mike had all the talent to have went wherever I went, or probably even further. Just happened the wrong point in time.
There was Omar Atlas, Pork Chop Cash, Tom Andrews, Bruiser Brody.
Everybody out there knows it was only a year ago I wrestled Harley Race on 4 different occasions at Memorial Hall. Never once did he put me on my back, and he won't. If you think back, I was the man, the only man in the 3-year reign of Harley Race to leave the ring carrying his belt.
And the natural Butch Reed.
Vince McMahon destroyed our business.
Took a couple years, it was maybe 3 years for it to say, hey, we give up.
The business has changed completely.
Vince was probably, it's not very good to admit this, but Vince was probably smarter than the rest of us were.
Destroyed our business. You can't say nothing else.
In the early 1980s, the structure of professional wrestling in the United States began changing dramatically, thanks mainly to the global vision of Vincent Kennedy McMahon Jr. In 1982, McMahon bought the Northeast Territory, then known as the Capital Wrestling Corporation, from his father, longtime promoter Vincent James McMahon. The McMahon family had a long history of promoting sporting events, including boxing, concerts, and pro wrestling, going back to Junior's grandfather, Roderick James Jess McMahon, who began his promoting career in 1909. By 1982, cable and closed-circuit television was rapidly growing, and Junior saw the chance to capitalize on this new media hotbed. Allegedly against his father's wishes, Junior began a crusade to take over the nation's wrestling territories with the vision of a global monopoly. Up to this point, wrestling promoters worked off handshakes and good faith, and Junior's goal was a major and ultimately the final blow to a framework of trust that lasted nearly a century.
The National Wrestling Alliance, and then there was the AWA, then there was Vince McMahon Sr. with the WWF, I think it was called back then. They all had their territories were chartered. Gus and Geigel and Pat had Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, parts of Nebraska, and once in a while they'd sneak across the border and go into Arkansas, but not too often. And you stayed in them territories. And they never promoted out of them, or nobody would come in. So when you would leave this territory after you're staying here for 3 or 4 months or whatever, then you would go to another territory. And at that time, I think there was like 25 territories around the country.
The National Wrestling Alliance was really good for wrestling. If you had a town and I had a town and both of us had TV in there would be no struggle between you and I because who wanted the town. We could talk about it. You take it or we'll take it. We don't care.
McMahon, who now owned the most profitable wrestling organization in the World Wrestling Federation, was able to buy television time in all the markets run by the National Wrestling Alliance, going head-to-head with more than 24 new enemy companies.
An example, Vince went into St. Louis in opposition to us. He came into Kansas City in opposition to us. And he did that every place. Minneapolis was one of the big wrestling territories in the United States. He went to Portland, did the same thing in Portland. I just was never a big WWF fan because without him, we'd have still been strong.
The Central States Territory, along with all the little territories, Tennessee, Georgia, Oregon, everybody went, so to speak, bye-bye when Vince McMahon went on USA Network nationwide.
You know, I knew Vince Sr. and I knew Vince Jr. and I knew Vince III. Vince's grandfather was an honorable, nice guy. Vince's father started to be an asshole, and then Vince is a complete.
Back before all this happened, I walked into the Municipal Auditorium downtown Kansas City. Myself and Bob Geigel walked into Vince's dressing room, and you could have heard a pin drop. And you get 40 or 50 wrestlers together, you're going to hear a lot of noise. But when I walked through that door, you could have heard a pin drop. The next time that happened, we were in Montreal, Canada, and I walked in to Vince's dressing room. There was a lot of guys that were in both those dressing rooms, and the reaction in both places was just unbelievable silence.
Geigel, O'Connor, and Race, under the company title of Heart of America Sports, were losing money fast. McMahon offered to buy the company outright from the trio, but his offer was considered an insult.
I met Vince and Jim Barnett in St. Louis. And they said, we'll buy you out. I said, well, let's talk about money. Because I have to negotiate for my partners too. I can't come back and say to Pat O'Connor and Harley Race, I sold out. What'd you get us? I couldn't do that. And so I said to Vince, what do you want to give us? And so he says, well, I'll give you $1,000 a week for 20 weeks. I said, then what? He said, well, I can't guarantee any more than that. I said, goodbye.
Race, who was 20 years younger than his partners, finally gave in and joined McMahon in New York.
I want to say I was up with Vince, 86, about the first time that I went up there. I walked away from a $500,000 investment because I could, you could see the handwriting on the wall. If I had the whole thing to do all over again, of course I would have found a way out of the area here before I lost 500 grand. What happened with Vince, there's nothing about him and myself on a personal level that I can ever say bad about him because his word was good to me. I left because I wasn't as old as I am today. I still needed to be involved. I still needed an income source rather than a depletion, which is what I had here. My first year up there was probably bigger than my middle range years as world's heavyweight champion. So it was an opportunity to recoup part of that money.
After the inevitable end to the Central States Territory, along with the other 24 former hotbeds in the late 1980s, the world of professional wrestling and the opportunities for wrestlers as well as fans changed forever.
Geigel and them wanted to fight it. Vern Gagne in Minnesota wanted to fight it. Vern saw the writing on the wall. Geigel and O'Connor, Harley, if he was involved, didn't have the assets to fight.
I don't know if I would enjoy it. No. I didn't really enjoy it the last 2 years when I was working for New York. The wrestlers have changed. We were a brotherhood back then, and now they all seem to have knives on them and stabbing you in the back, and they're doing their own thing.
You can say he's got tremendous athletes, but anytime you go on TV and announce that it's a show, and when there was so many of us that had tremendous wrestling backgrounds that could pull the average person's arms and legs off and throw them out in the crowd, it's embarrassing.
You lost something. You lost the charisma. You still had the great matches. You still had the good big events in New York Madison Square Garden. But you didn't know who was sitting next to you. What I felt sorry for was the people who came out to be with their family on Thursday night. It's gone.
And that was the end of the end.
Kansas City, at least as a wrestling territory, has been gone for decades now, and most of those involved have stepped away from the business. But for the fans who love them, the memories will live forever.
It opened a lot of doors for me. I work at the Liberty 12 B&B Theater Complex. I've been there for almost 11 years, talking to people, talking to kids, again, sharing the memories with them. And not a day goes by somebody doesn't come bring it to the fact that, hey, Bill, I remember you from wrestling. Are you still Bill? Are you Bill Kirsten? You know, yeah.
It's something that I'm going to continue to do as long as my health will allow me to do it. And I can always say that I've been probably one of the most fortunate human beings on the face of the earth to be able to do what you absolutely love to do your whole life.
A couple of years ago in Las Vegas, I was sitting with Red Bastien. We were sitting together talking about old times, and both of us got up and we were sitting at a bar, and they had like 4 steps down to leave the bar. And both of us held on the rail on each side, and we kind of hobbled down. And he looked at me and he says, "Oh, we're sure suffering today, aren't we, Tom?" And I said, "Yeah, a little bit." And he says, "Would you do it again?" And I says, "In a New York second." And he said, "I would too." That's how I sum it up.
If you can beat me in 10 minutes, you get $1,000. And we would back it up. And there's a few times I wished I wouldn't have been in there. Some military personnel run my ass off for 10 minutes, but nobody ever beat me because I had great big, like, truck drivers, you know. And you'd lock up with them, and you'd push them in the corner, and they're like froze. What do I do now? And I slap him upside the head as hard as I could, and they would just paralyze. I say, "Chase me!" And I'd take off, and here they come. You know, it was like, you know, here I am. This is a spectator challenged me for $1,000, and I'm telling him to chase me. I run and scoot out of the ring. Well, he runs and gets out of the ring, but he jumps out, and I swing around the corner and roll back in the ring. And he runs a full length down and around the corner and halfway up the other side and get back in the ring. Well, we do that a couple of times. He's tongue hanging this far out. He goes to get in the ring. I kick him in the head. He rolls over. I pin him, and they raise my hand.
One night we had the Sheik wrestled in Municipal Auditorium. He's wrestling a young man from Kansas State, fine-looking young man. The Sheik, in those days, there you have the Arab influence, and he did everything but ride a camel into the auditorium. So this one night, cold night, 10,000 people in the auditorium watching the Sheik win another one. And at the end of the match, they gathered at ringside, about 75 of the redneck people wanted to kill that Sheik. They wanted no part of him. So they're screaming, I knew there was going to be trouble. So the Sheik is looking for an exit of some way to get out of there without getting killed. Well, he's running for the dressing room, the locker room. He missed the door for the locker room and is now outside on 13th Street in downtown Kansas City. The temperature's about 10 above in Kansas City. And he's running for his life, and there's a crowd of 75 rednecks chasing him down the street. And screaming to get him. And here is a sheik. He had his robes on, and he's screaming, "Taxi! Taxi!"